The steamship's foghorn sounded once, low and indifferent, as it dissolved into the grey throat of How Sound and took with it Edie's trunk, her father's monogrammed stationery, and the last remnant of the fiction that she was still considered a Marchmont daughter. What it left on the dock at the Squamish supply post was a November rain, a single leather valise, and a young woman whose right hand had not kept still since the winter she was 9 years old. The dockhand who had watched her off, the gang, at weather-beaten man of the gangway. A weather-beaten man she did not know and would never see again, had already disappeared back into the supply shed. She understood that now. She had understood at the moment the first mate touched the brim of his cap without meeting her eyes, and said that her father had arranged onward transport, that there would be someone to collect her. There was no one. There was a dock going soft with rot at the far pilings, a supply shed with a padlocked door, and the mountains that rose on every side of the valley, like walls that had decided they were done listening. Edie set the valise down on the dock planking. She sat on top of it, which was not dignified, but dignity had begun to seem beside the point some time ago. Her right hand rested in her lap, fingers curling and releasing against her thigh, in the involuntary rhythm that had governed the last 17 years of her life. Nerve damage, the Vancouver physician had said, when she was 11, possibly permanent. Fine motor control in the dominant hand was likely gone. Her father had received that news in the same tone he used for poor commodity prices, a setback, a liability item. She had not been brought out of the east wing of the family house on Burrard Street for 3 years, except for the annual Christmas photograph, where she held her right hand behind her back. Her father was a man who moved shipping contracts, who built and dismantled companies through signatures and handshakes, and a daughter who could not sign her own name clearly was a daughter he had already decided what to do with. He had simply taken longer than she expected to do it. She was 26 years old, and had not signed her name to a document in 11 of them. The rain increased. It was not the polite rain of the social seasons she had watched from her window. It was a BC coast November rain, horizontal, gritty, with a particular malice for the backs of necks. Her velvet travelling coat was already soaked through. The last of the daylight was going fast. The mountains ate it early here. She stood, because sitting felt too much like accepting what came next. Her right hand swung at her side, fingers jumping. She reached for the valise handle with her left. She could walk. She had always been able to walk. It was not her legs they had decided were the problem. She had made it perhaps 30 feet along the dock toward the supply shed when a sound rose over the rain. A horse somewhere in the tree line, one horse moving at a pace that said it was not in a hurry, which meant it knew the trail. The man who emerged from the dark firs was large in the way the mountains were large. Not a matter of individual dimension, but of presence that suggested the surrounding landscape had shaped him specifically for it. He wore a coat of oiled canvas, gone grey with use, a wide hat with the brim beaten down by weather, and had a face that had been out in the elements long enough that the elements had left their mark in the lines around his eyes and the set of his jaw. His horse was a black roan, ugly and steady, with the look of an animal that had learned not to be surprised by anything. He stopped the horse a short distance from the dock. He looked at the supply shed, then at her, then at the valise in her left hand. He did not look sympathetic. He looked like a man doing arithmetic. "Supply boat doesn't stop here in winter," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind that carried without effort. "Hasn't for 6 weeks." Edie straightened her spine. "I'm aware." He looked at the southern end of the channel, where the steamship had been. "Somebody left you." "Yes." He dismounted. He was taller on the ground. He tied the horse to a dock cleat without taking his eyes off her, in the manner of someone who had performed the motion so many times it required no attention. Then he looked at her right hand. The trembling was worse in the cold, it always was. The fingers moved against her coat in small, continuous spasms. She could not stop. "Hurt?" he asked. "No, nerve damage. It's been this way since I was a child." He absorbed this the way he seemed to absorb everything, without event. He looked at the mountains, then at the sky, reading something in both that she could not yet decipher. "Storms coming in off the Tantalus. Hard one. Temperature drops another 10 degrees tonight." He looked back at her. "There's a cabin 3 miles up the valley." He didn't offer more than that. He walked back to his horse and adjusted a saddlebag with the purposefulness of a man who had already made his decision, and was not interested in prolonging the announcement of it. "My name is Edie," she said to his back. "Arlen," he said without turning around. "You riding or walking?" She looked at the dark tree line, the rain, the mountains closing in. She looked at her shaking hand. "Riding," she said. The cabin sat at the edge of a creek that had not yet frozen. It was a single room of dovetail-notched logs, with a clay-chinked roof and a window, so small it let in more cold than light. It smelled of pine resin, smoke, and the particular mineral damp of mountain rock. Everything in it had a use. Nothing in it was decorative. Arlen dropped her valise near the door, went to the iron stove, and had a fire going in 4 minutes. He did not explain how. He simply did it. Edie stood near the door, wet to the skin, her right hand shaking against her hip, and understood that she was either going to start functioning, or she was going to be a problem. And from the economical way Arlen moved around the small space, she could see clearly that a problem was something he had not budgeted for. "What do you need done?" she asked. He stopped. He looked at her with the same direct arithmetic as before. "Water's in the bucket by the door. Needs filling from the creek. Trail's 20 yards, marked with a split cedar." He paused. "Left hand can manage a bucket." It was not a question. It was a statement of observable fact. Edie picked up the bucket with her left hand and went out into the rain. She was not useful for a long time. Her left hand was her weaker one, had always been the hand that bumped the glass and fumbled the needle. Arlen gave her tasks and watched her do them badly without comment. He corrected only when the bad work would matter. Angle the blade down, not across when she was scraping a hide, or pack the kindling looser when she was laying the fire. He did not tell her she had done well. He told her what to do next. In the mornings, her right hand was worst. She had spent 26 years trying to hide the trembling and had not succeeded in hiding it once. She expected Arlen to flinch from it, or to offer the vague, distressed sympathy she had grown up receiving, which was worse than flinching because it required her to comfort people about her own body. He did neither. He looked at it when it was relevant, and ignored it when it was not. When she dropped something because of it, he picked it up. He did not make an event of it. By the 3rd week, she could lay a proper fire. By the 4th, she could carry 2 buckets from the creek, without losing significant water from either. One evening in December, he came in from the trapline and set a dead lynx on the table. The fur was worth real money in Squamish if the pelt was clean. He looked at her, then at the skinning knife on the counter. "I'll teach you to do it left-handed," he said. "Takes longer. Technique's the same." She had never touched a dead animal in her life. The lynx was heavier than it looked, still faintly warm. She touched the dense silver-grey fur with her left hand, feeling the mass of it, the reality of it. "Tell me where to start," she said. He stood behind her left shoulder. He did not reach over and take her hand the way people often did when trying to show her something, as though her hands were the problem. He simply told her, with the economy of a man who had explained things many times to no one. The inside of the hind ankle, the angle of entry, or the distinction between skin and muscle. He named them and said what to do instead. When the pelt was off, not clean, not even close, but off, she held it up in her left hand. "That's 12 minutes slower than it should have been," Arlen said, from where he'd settled by the stove. "I know." Next one will be 10 minutes slower than it should be. I know that too. He looked at the pelt. Faster every time. That's the only thing that matters. She looked at her own left hand, at the blood drying in the creases of her palm. The foreign solidity of what she had just done. Something shifted in her chest, quiet and tectonic. The sensation of a weight moving that had been fixed in one position for 17 years. She had been told in various careful formulations what she could not do since she was 9 years old. She had never been told what she could do instead. She was beginning to understand that the two lists were not as similar in length as she had been led to believe. January came in like a threat made good. The creek froze. The thermometer outside the window, a battered mercury instrument nailed to the log beside the door, dropped past the numbers Arlen had penciled in small markings below the printed scale. The forest made sounds at night she had learned to categorize, the crack of frozen saps and splitting a fir trunk, which Arlen called a rifle shot for the uninitiated, the groan of a bough under snow load. The silence that followed both. Arlen was gone 6 hours, checking the upper trapline when the quality of the valley's silence changed. She was at the table, mending a wool sock with her left hand. Her stitching was still ugly, but it held. When she noticed it, not a new sound, an old sound that had stopped. The particular rhythm of the mountain, the small creakings and settlings she had absorbed into her body over 2 months, without realizing it, had paused. She waited. Then she stopped waiting, which was new, and went out. She found him at the 3/4-mile mark of the upper trail, where a black spruce 3 feet through at the base had come down across the path. He was on his side in the snow, his right leg pinned under the outer edge of the crown, conscious. His hunting knife out and working on a branch that was doing nothing useful. Because the branch was not the problem. The problem was the trunk. Edie dropped to her knees beside him and assessed. The trunk was old growth, but the crown had broken the force of the fall. The section pinning his leg was a secondary limb, 18 inches through. He was not crushed, he was held. Is the leg broken? She asked. Don't think so. Can't get leverage. His voice was controlled. His jaw was tight. He'd been in the snow, pinned for some time. Edie was not physically strong. She had her left hand, which was getting stronger, and her right, which would shake until she died, and a mind that had spent 17 years with very little else to do but read. She had read every book in her father's library, including 3 on mechanical engineering that she had taken out of boredom and finished out of hunger for something that worked the way it was supposed to. She found 2 deadfall branches of the right length, and drove them into the snow on the downhill side of the limb. From his pack, which had fallen clear, she took the coil of rope and rigged a lever, using a birch sapling as the fulcrum, bracing her feet against the packed snow at the trunk's base. When I lift it, she said, pull yourself back, don't try to stand. You can't. I haven't asked for your opinion, she said. She pulled the rope hand over hand, her left shoulder screaming. The lever gave her what she could not provide alone. The limb shifted. 1 inch, 2 inches, but enough. Arlen pulled himself clear. She let the rope go. The limb dropped back with a sound like a heavy door closing. She sat back on her heels in the snow. Her left hand was shaking now from exertion. Her right was doing what it always did. Arlen sat up in the snow and looked at the rope, the branches, the sapling. He looked at her for a long moment. My father's library, she said before he could ask. He didn't let me in the office, but he never thought to lock the bookshelves. February. Arlen's leg was severely bruised but unbroken, the ligaments strained. He was grounded for 3 weeks. He sat by the stove with his leg elevated and worked at the table in the evenings on something she could not identify from across the room. She had become the hands of the cabin. She checked the lower snares. She hauled water, chopped wood. Badly at first, with a technique that wasted most of its force, then less badly as she adjusted for a single good arm and a center of gravity that didn't know the axe yet, and kept the fire from going below what the stove needed. She was no longer a guest. She was not sure what she was, except necessary, which was a thing she had never been in any room she'd occupied before this one. One evening she looked up from the almanac she had been reading, his third copy. She had already finished the other two, and saw what he was making. A brace, not for the leg, for a forearm. He had salvaged the light spring steel from a broken trap and was setting it into a cuff of boiled moose, hide shaped over a wooden mold he had carved to the rough dimensions of a human forearm. The leather was soft, firm at the edges. He was working brass eyelets in with methodical patience, one at a time. "That's not for your leg," she said. "No." She watched him drive an eyelet home with the small punch. The fire threw orange light across his hands. "You watched how it moves," she said. "Wrist is where the instability comes from, not the elbow." He held the piece up, turning it in the light. A rigid splint runs the whole forearm. Useless for work. You can't flex at the elbow. This one braces the wrist joint specifically. Leaves the elbow free. He looked at her. You'd still shake. But if the wrist holds, the shake doesn't translate into the hand the same way. Edie was quiet for a moment. "They never tried to make me something like this," she said. The physicians, the specialists her father had consulted in the early years, before he had stopped consulting them and started consulting architects, about the East Wing layout instead. "No," Arlen said. He went back to the eyelet. "I expect they didn't." 3 nights later, he set it on the table in front of her, without ceremony. She pushed her right hand through the leather cuff. He laced it closed. From across the table, his hands moving with the same economy he brought to everything. The fit was exact. He had watched her hand for 2 months, and it showed. The spring steel sat along the outside of her wrist like a second bone. She raised her hand. The tremor was still there. It would always be there, but the wrist held. The shaking ran through her fingers in smaller, attenuated waves, the way a breakwater absorbs the force of water without stopping the water. She closed her right hand around a tin mug on the table. She picked it up. The liquid inside barely moved. She had not successfully lifted a full cup with her right hand in 11 years. She had long since stopped attempting it in front of people, because of the particular bottomless humiliation of spilling in front of faces arranged in expressions of patient sorrow. She set the mug down. She looked at her right hand in the brace, and then at Arlen, who was watching her with the flat, steady attention she had come to recognize as his version of concern. "Thank you," she said. 2 words were inadequate by approximately the distance between Vancouver and here, but she said them because they were true, and she had learned that true things were worth saying plainly. He nodded once. He picked up the mug she had set down, refilled it from the pot on the stove, and set it back in front of her right hand. "Your father's people will come in April," he said, "when the valley road clears." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "People who leave things unfinished always come back when they think enough time has passed." He looked at her steadily. "What will you tell them?" Edie looked at the mug she was holding. The tin was warm against her palm. The wrist held. "Whatever I decide to tell them," she said, "that's new." April arrived through mud and snowmelt and the continuous low roar of the creek running hard with glacier water. The shirt. She heard the horses before she saw them. She was on the porch watching the furs drip when the sound of hooves in deep mud came up the valley road. Arlen appeared from around the side of the cabin where he'd been splitting wood. He set the axe against the wall and crossed his arms and did not go inside. 2 men emerged from the tree line. One wore a city coat that had done badly in the mud and was doing worse by the minute. The other was Gilbert. He had their father's jaw and their father's habit of assessing a room before entering it. He went still when he saw her. The way He used to goat when she appeared somewhere he hadn't expected her, as though her presence was a logistical problem that required recalculation. He was looking at the men's trousers tucked into work boots, at the brace on her right wrist, at the fact that she was standing on a porch in the mountains with an expression he had never seen on her face, because she had not been wearing it before. "Father died in January," he said. He glanced at Arlen, then back. He had his father's capacity for delivering information without delivering it to you specifically. "I suspected," Edie said. "What do you need?" Gilbert's solicitor, Prentice, thin, precise, folio under his arm, stepped forward with the careful movement of a man navigating mud in dress shoes who had not yet made peace with the situation. "Your father's estate is held in trust. The shipping interests, the commercial shares, the properties. Upon his death, the principal portion reverts to the eldest surviving child." He cleared his throat. "That is you, miss, however, in the event of incapacitation." "I'm not incapacitated." Prentice looked at her right hand. "Your condition." "My condition," Edie said, "is that I have nerve damage in my right hand, and I have been managing it without anyone's assistance for 26 years. "What condition are you in?" Gilbert stepped forward. His voice was lower than Prentice's, and more practiced, the voice he used in boardrooms to make people feel the conversation had already been decided. "Edie, be reasonable. You cannot administer a shipping concern from—" He looked at the cabin, the creek, the mountains behind it. "Here." "No," Edie agreed. "I can't do it from here." He held out the pen. She looked at the documents in the open folio. The pages were crisp, heavy stock, the kind her father had ordered from Montreal, the kind her father had stopped putting in front of her 11 years ago because her signature had become unreliable, and an unreliable signature on a commercial document was a liability he was not prepared to carry. She thought about the Squamish dock, the padlocked shed, the 30 feet she had walked toward it in the November rain before she stopped and looked at the mountains instead. She thought about the lynx pelt and the lever in the snow and the mug she had picked up in February. She took the folio from Prentice. She took the pen. Prentice leaned forward. Gilbert exhaled. Edie turned the documents over to the back page where the paper was blank. She pressed the folio flat against the porch railing. She uncapped the pen. She fitted the grip between her right fingers and steadied her wrist against the wood, feeling the brace hold against the tremor. She signed her name, her actual name, clearly in full, with her right hand, for the first time in 11 years. Then she capped the pen and closed the folio and handed them back to Prentice. "Those documents are not executed in the place you wanted them executed," she said. "That signature indicates I have read what you've brought me, and I am declining to transfer anything. My own solicitor, who is not you, will be in contact with my brother's firm from Vancouver when I determine the road is clear enough for the trip." Gilbert stared at her. "You'll contest it," she said. "The estate is mine. I am not incapacitated. I am not deceased." She looked at him, this man who had watched her carried upstairs at dinner parties rather than let the guests see her negotiate the staircase, this man who had told their father that the problem would eventually resolve itself. "I'm standing on my own porch, Gilbert. You can go now." He looked at Prentice. Prentice looked at the folio. Neither of them looked at the mountain man standing at the corner of the cabin, with his arms still crossed, who had not moved or spoken since they arrived, and whose stillness was somehow more informative than motion would have been. They went. She watched the mud close over the tracks their horses left. Then she stayed watching until there was nothing left to watch, until the valley road was just the valley road again, wet and ordinary and running north toward Squamish and south toward the rest of everything she had yet to work out. Behind her, she heard Arlen pick up the axe. The sound of splitting wood resumed, steady, unhurried, the sound the valley made on a morning that had decided to be nothing other than itself. She turned and looked at the mountain. She thought about the Vancouver house, the east wing, the window she spent 3 years on the wrong side of. She thought about what she was going to say to a solicitor, and what a solicitor was going to say back, and what it would mean to walk into a room of people who had known her as her father's damaged inventory and show them what 11 months in the coast mountains had made of her instead. She thought about coming back after. She looked at her right hand in the brace. The tremor ran through her fingers in its diminished, familiar way, like water finding its level. The wrist held. It would always hold now, not because the damage was gone. The damage was permanent. And she had, finally, in the long silence of the mountain winter, finished arguing with that fact, but because someone had looked at the damage directly and built around it, rather than waiting for it to resolve into something more convenient. She went inside and started the afternoon fire. The mountains held the valley the way they always had, enormous and indifferent to the small particulars of any given human life, being sorted out beneath them. Edie was beginning to understand that indifferent was not the same as hostile, and that a place which did not care about her history was, in its own austere way, the most honest welcome she had ever received. Her right hand rested on the iron handle of the stove door. The wrist held. She opened it and put the wood in.